Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford wasn't just one of the most disciplined actresses of Hollywood's golden age. She was also one of the most daring when it came to love. While her public image was built on class, ambition, and elegance, her private life told a different tale. A woman who loved to dominate both the screen and the bedroom, often with younger men under her thumb. By the time she was in her 40s, Joan had already endured several failed marriages, including to the younger actor Franchot Tone. But what fascinated the gossip columns were her romantic entanglements with rising stars and dancers barely out of their 20s. She dated Greg Boutzer, a charming lawyer more than a decade younger, and used her influence to help his career. Then came her rumored flings with men like Van Johnson and Jeff Chandler. Each younger, each seemingly mesmerized by her intensity. But these weren't casual trysts. Joan loved control. Her affairs were calculated, emotional performances, where she played the powerful seductress and the emotionally wounded woman, often simultaneously. Her lovers would speak of being both pampered and intimidated. She demanded their attention, their adoration, and yes, sometimes even their obedience. In her final years, Crawford never remarried, but was often seen with much younger escorts at public events. Even as her looks faded, her confidence never did. She had rewritten the rules, proudly embodying a woman who refused to fade into the background or settle for age-appropriate companions. Marlene Dietrich. When it came to seduction, few did it with more elegance, or more danger, than Marlene Dietrich. Her heavy-lidded eyes and aloof voice weren't just part of her on-screen mystique. They mirrored the aura she exuded in real life, especially around younger men who couldn't resist her gravity. Dietrich had lovers of all ages, but she was drawn to the youthfulness of spirit and body. She was linked romantically to Yul Brynner, years her junior, as well as to several European actors and intellectuals in their 20s and 30s while she was approaching her 50s. Her daughter Maria once admitted that her mother didn't believe in aging, and that extended to her choice of lovers. Dietrich didn't merely date younger men. She made them feel part of her legend. She would write them letters scented with her perfume, leave poetry in their coat pockets, and fly across countries just to spend a weekend with them. These were not fleeting affairs. She left unforgettable marks on their lives. But it wasn't about vanity. For Marlene, youth represented life, vitality, resistance to societal decay. In post-war Europe and Hollywood, where age defined worth, especially for women, she flipped the script. She didn't age quietly or respectfully. She aged rebelliously with young men at her side and the world at her feet. Gloria Swanson. She conquered the silent screen with eyes that could tell 1,000 stories. But in her personal life, Gloria Swanson was far louder, far bolder. Swanson, best remembered for her unforgettable role in Sunset Boulevard, had a complicated love life filled with scandal, secrecy, and a surprising pattern. She was drawn to younger, more pliable men. After her well-publicized affair with Joseph P. Kennedy, yes, the father of JFK, Gloria embraced European elegance and began surrounding herself with youthful male admirers who often doubled as assistants, dancers, or aspiring artists. She was decades older than some of them, but that never stopped her. In fact, she wore the age gap like a badge of honor. By her 60s, she had turned dating into something of an art form. She famously traveled across Europe with a handsome Italian actor half her age, attracting stares but never apologies. While the press whispered about courting controversy, Gloria simply lived on her own terms. To her, these men weren't trophies. They were partners in a shared fantasy of eternal youth. Even into her 70s, Gloria Swanson remained active, radiant, and, yes, romantically adventurous. She never remarried, but she never really needed to. In her world, youthful affection was a form of worship, and she relished every moment of it. Tula Bankhead. No actress blurred the line between scandal and charm quite like Tula Bankhead. With a raspy voice, southern wit, and a magnetic disregard for convention, Tula lived her life like a stage, always bold, always dramatic, and always with a younger man or woman in her orbit. Though openly pansexual in private circles, she often flaunted her affection for young actors, including stage performers who were mesmerized by her rebellious energy. Tallulah didn't just date younger men. She mentored, adored, and seduced them. Her lovers, often half her age, were drawn to her defiance of Hollywood's moral code. Her parties were infamous, filled with poetry, jazz, and beautiful young men sprawled on velvet couches. But behind the eccentricity was a woman who had suffered deep loneliness. The younger lovers, often fleeting, brought her the emotional adrenaline she craved. She once quipped, "My father warned me about men and booze, but he never said anything about women and cocaine," revealing just how far she'd go for thrill and for connection. Bankhead never married. She didn't need to. Her power lay in short-lived intensity, in romancing those who were still wide-eyed about the world. Younger men saw her not as a fading star, but as a vibrant legend, and that was exactly how she wanted to be remembered. Mae West. Before the term cougar existed, Mae West was already living it. Known for her sassy one-liners and voluptuous charm, she was as sexually progressive off-screen as she was on it. While her contemporaries were hiding gray hairs and lying about their age, Mae West was dating men 20 to 30 years younger and flaunting it like a trophy. Her most notable relationship was with Paul Novak, a bodybuilder 30 years her junior. They met when she was in her late 60s, and he was barely past 30. Critics sneered, audiences raised eyebrows. But Mae didn't care. She kept Paul by her side for nearly 3 decades, calling him her muscle man and giving him roles in her stage shows. She loved being the center of attention, but more than that, she loved being in control. Mae always claimed her youth came from being around young energy. She was known to say, "You're never too old to become younger," and she lived by it. Her home was filled with mirrors, roses, and shirtless dancers. Even into her 80s, she dressed like a woman in her prime and dated like one too. When people questioned the age difference, she simply replied, "Why go for an old horse when you can ride a young colt?" It wasn't just humor, it was her truth, and she lived it unapologetically. Lana Turner. Few actresses of the golden age had a more tumultuous love life than Lana Turner, a stunning blonde bombshell who epitomized Hollywood glamour. She was also a woman perpetually in search of real love, and often found it in the arms of younger men who promised passion without judgment. After surviving 7 failed marriages, Lana seemed to realize that youthful charm offered something older, jaded men could not: innocence and adoration. In the final chapters of her life, she began dating men more than a decade younger, including aspiring actors and dancers who idolized her screen image. Her most notable post-fame relationship was with a man 15 years younger, who she described as a safe harbor after a lifetime of stormy romances. But age gaps came with consequences. Some accused her lovers of using her for fame or money. Others said Lana simply couldn't accept growing old. But friends insisted she was chasing happiness, not headlines. Lana once said, "I wanted to believe in love, and I wanted someone who could believe in me." With younger men, she found that belief, at least for a while. Her aging body may have betrayed her, but her heart never lost its hunger for devotion. Even toward the end, she never stopped wearing heels, red lipstick, and carrying herself like a woman ready to be loved again. For Lana Turner, age was never a barrier. It was a badge of resilience, and younger lovers were simply drawn to her fire. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo was the ultimate enigma of Hollywood's golden age. Silent, aloof, and devastatingly beautiful. Her desire to be alone became legendary, immortalized in her famous line, "I want to be alone." But what few knew was that in that seclusion, Garbo wasn't always alone. She was discreet, fiercely private, but drawn to younger men whose vitality and naivety contrasted with her emotional depth. Garbo never married, and while the world speculated endlessly about her rumored relationships with both men and women, insiders confirmed that several of her closest romantic companions were significantly younger men, often artists or actors who admired her from afar before being drawn into her quiet world. These weren't red carpet affairs. Garbo didn't do publicity romances. She courted in whispers, secret walks, and handwritten letters. One notable relationship involved a young European nobleman who was nearly 20 years younger. Friends said Garbo was captivated by his innocence and charm. She would cook for him, discuss literature, and spend days by the sea in total privacy. The youth gave her what fame never could, the ability to let down her guard. Garbo saw herself aging in a town obsessed with youth, and perhaps these young lovers were her way of reclaiming that fleeting sense of vitality. They didn't challenge her. They adored her, and she in turn offered them a glimpse into a mythic life few could ever access. By the time she was in her 60s, Garbo had entirely vanished from public life. But to those who knew her best, she never stopped inviting youth into her solitude, quietly proving that even the most private of stars had a heart still burning for connection. Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck was known as one of the toughest, most professional actresses of her time. A former Ziegfeld girl who climbed her way from poverty to stardom, she had no time for nonsense. And yet, beneath that steel exterior was a woman who longed for affection. After her painful divorce from actor Robert Taylor, 4 years her junior, she never remarried. But she didn't retreat from romance either. Instead, she began quietly dating younger men who reminded her of the youth she never got to fully enjoy. Taylor was just 25 when they wed, and although their marriage was partly engineered by MGM, Barbara truly loved him. She was devastated when it ended. After that, she sought out relationships where the emotional stakes were lower, and younger men fit that mold. They weren't looking to control her. They admired her. They made her feel young again. One dancer in her later years was reportedly more than 15 years younger, and they were seen vacationing together and attending charity events. She kept it discreet, not because she was ashamed, but because Barbara Stanwyck valued her dignity more than the limelight. She never spoke about her love life to the press, but friends often remarked that she was happiest when she was the older, wiser guide in a younger man's life. She once said, "I'm a woman of the 30s. We didn't whine, we survived." And that's exactly what she did, with grace, independence, and the occasional touch of youthful romance to soften life's harder edges. Zsa Zsa Gabor. Zsa Zsa Gabor was Hollywood's ultimate diva. 9 marriages, countless affairs, and enough sparkle to light up all of Beverly Hills. But beyond the tiaras and tabloid drama, there was a consistent pattern in her romantic life. Zsa Zsa loved younger men. In fact, she seemed to collect them like accessories, each one making her feel more alive, more adored, and more in control. Her marriages often made headlines, but it was her relationships with younger suitors that truly defined her post-fame persona. Zsa Zsa didn't just date younger men, she enchanted them, making them feel like they were starring in their own fairy tale. These men ranged from young businessmen to struggling actors, often dazzled by her confidence and old-world charm. She once famously said, "I am a marvelous housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep the house." But beneath the bravado was a woman who hated growing old alone. Being with younger men helped her pretend, if only temporarily, that time hadn't touched her. It wasn't about lust, it was about life. Youth, to Zsa Zsa, meant movement, laughter, passion. Her final husband, Frederick Prince von Anhalt, was 26 years younger, and while he insisted theirs was a deep love, many believed Zsa Zsa relished the optics. A vibrant older star with a handsome, younger prince. Even as her health faded, she insisted on maintaining appearances, demanding makeup, perfume, and the presence of her younger lover at her side. To Zsa Zsa, the idea of aging gracefully was nonsense. She aged flamboyantly, defiantly, and with a younger man always nearby to remind her and the world that she was still Zsa Zsa Gabor, the woman no one could tame. Ava Gardner. Ava Gardner was no stranger to heartbreak, scandal, or tabloid obsession. She was one of the most breathtaking stars to ever emerge from Hollywood's golden age. And yet she was also one of its most emotionally restless. After her notorious marriage to Frank Sinatra unraveled, Ava Gardner drifted, emotionally and geographically, into the arms of younger men who offered not commitment, but raw passion. Living in Spain during the 1960s, Ava became something of a mythical figure, a barefoot bohemian goddess, drinking sangria on balconies and dancing with matadors and musicians barely out of their 20s. One such bullfighter, the dashing Luis Miguel Dominguín, was over a decade younger, and Ava was said to be infatuated with his bravado and youth. Her Spanish years were defined not by acting roles, but by a parade of affairs that burned hot and fast. Ava didn't want stability. She'd had enough of that in Hollywood. She wanted freedom, desire, youth, and she didn't care who judged her for it. Younger men offered her the escape she craved from an industry that had cast her aside too soon. Friends described her later romances as chaotic but intoxicating. She would fall deeply, even destructively, into the arms of men who idolized her and made her feel invincible again. And when the passion cooled, she moved on, usually with a bottle of wine and a new dance partner. Ava never remarried. She once said, "I made it very clear that I would never become a housewife again." But she also made it clear that being desired by the young was her private rebellion against time, fame, and fading beauty. And in doing so, she rewrote the rules of aging in Hollywood. Ann Miller. Ann Miller was Broadway legs and tap shoes in Overdrive. Known for dancing at speeds that defied physics, she brought a spark to the screen that no one could replicate. But behind the high kicks and megawatt smile was a woman who suffered loneliness, betrayal, and the constant pressure to always be on. After a series of heartbreaks, including an abusive marriage, Anne began surrounding herself with younger men, dancers, actors, musicians, who brought energy and escape. Anne wasn't interested in power plays. She had survived too much for that. What she craved in her later years was company, joy, vitality, and that often came in the form of someone younger. Her companions weren't always lovers, but the line was blurred. She had flings with touring performers and choreographers who looked up to her, not just as a legend, but as a woman of fire. In her 50s and 60s, Anne was often spotted with men half her age at charity galas and rehearsals. She loved teaching them to dance, recounting old Hollywood stories, and basking in their attention. Some saw it as vanity. Others knew it was healing. Anne had been through enough pain to understand that love didn't have to last forever to mean something. She never officially remarried after her second divorce, but she openly admitted she felt most alive around young men. They reminded her of who she once was and who she still could be under the right spotlight. For Ann Miller, every dance had a rhythm, and the heartbeat of youth, that was her favorite tempo. Claudette Colbert. Claudette Colbert was a class act, always poised, always elegant, and always in control of her image. But beneath that perfection was a private woman with a secretive romantic history, one that included younger companions who kept her entertained and emotionally grounded, particularly in her later years. Unlike her flashier peers, Claudette didn't seek headlines. She didn't flaunt her relationships. But friends and insiders often spoke about her discreet companionship with men who were sometimes 10 to 15 years her junior, especially after she began spending more time in Europe during the 1950s. After the death of her husband, Dr. Joel Pressman, she never remarried. But she wasn't alone. Photographs and anecdotes reveal a pattern of younger male friends turned lovers who joined her at exclusive villas, Parisian restaurants, and yacht parties in the south of France. One longtime companion, a French film assistant decades younger, was said to be utterly devoted to her. Colbert reportedly preferred younger men because they didn't challenge her authority or independence. She didn't want to be someone's wife again. She wanted adoration without sacrifice. And in younger men, she found devotion without domination. Her choice to date discreetly and avoid marriage again may have robbed her of the spotlight, but it preserved something more sacred, her autonomy. Claudette Colbert lived like a queen, and young courtiers were always welcome at her side. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge was more than just the first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. She was a woman who shattered ceilings in an industry built to keep her out. But while her professional life broke barriers, her personal life was a battlefield of heartbreak. After enduring a devastating marriage to dancer Harold Nicholas, who was often absent and unfaithful, Dorothy became increasingly drawn to younger, emotionally available men who provided a contrast to the abandonment she had suffered. In the late 1950s and early 60s, as Hollywood began to turn its back on her, Dorothy sought out companionship among younger actors and musicians, men who looked at her not as a fading star, but as a radiant, resilient woman. These relationships often flew under the radar, taking place in hotel rooms, on quiet beaches, or overseas, where the racial taboos of America held less sway. She was romantically linked to a young jazz guitarist, barely in his 20s, who reportedly traveled with her during her nightclub tour across Europe. Those who knew her said she smiled more, laughed freely, and felt desired, not for her fame, but for her spirit. For Dorothy, youth wasn't about vanity, it was about healing. Younger men didn't carry the bitterness or power struggles of older Hollywood types. They offered tenderness, new beginnings. Sadly, Dorothy's life was cut short at age 42. But in her final years, she lived on her terms, quietly, often painfully, but surrounded by youthful energy that helped her remember the passion she once brought to every frame of film. Hedi Lamar. Hedi Lamar was labeled the most beautiful woman in the world, but behind those perfect cheekbones was an intellect as sharp as her jawline. A self-taught inventor who helped develop a precursor to Wi-Fi, Hedi was never fully understood by Hollywood. Her relationships were often turbulent, marked by power imbalances and betrayals. But in her later years, she found emotional safety and renewed confidence by surrounding herself with younger men who admired not just her beauty, but her brilliant mind. After several failed marriages, including one to a much older Austrian munitions dealer, Hedi began dating men 10 to 20 years her junior, especially during her post-Hollywood years in Florida and Switzerland. Some were aspiring actors, others tech enthusiasts who admired her for her forgotten inventions. For once, she wasn't just arm candy, she was the conversation starter, the teacher, the muse. One such companion, a young engineer, reportedly worked with her on unpublished patents and lived with her for nearly 2 years. Friends described their bond as passionate but grounded, built not just on attraction, but mutual fascination. He brought vitality, she brought wisdom, and together they created a rare kind of intimacy. Hedi never remarried after her 6th divorce. She once said, "I've been in love with my own ideas more than any man." Yet in younger lovers, she found the spark that reignited her sense of self, not as a fading star, but as a woman finally seen on her own terms. Susan Hayward. Susan Hayward was known for playing strong-willed, tragic heroines, but her real life was just as dramatic. Behind that fiery red hair and Academy Award-winning talent was a woman who weathered emotional storms, physical abuse, and loneliness, especially in her later years. After 2 tumultuous marriages, one of which ended in her husband's suicide, Susan withdrew from the spotlight, but she never fully withdrew from love. In the late 1960s, she began quietly seeing younger men, often those who weren't part of the industry, a Texas ranch hand, a jazz pianist in his 20s, a former Army medic who later said Susan was the most electric woman he'd ever known. These weren't headline-grabbing affairs. They were private, tender, and often brief, but deeply meaningful to her. Unlike her early relationships, where power struggles and betrayal loomed, these younger men saw her for who she truly was, a survivor, a woman who had lost her twin sister, fought through depression, and endured cancer. Younger lovers offered her something unique, no expectations, no control games, just presence and admiration. Susan once said in an interview, "I've cried enough in life to know when something finally feels right. And perhaps it was in these final quiet romances, spent drinking tea on a veranda or listening to jazz under the stars, that she found that rightness." She died in 1975, still fiercely independent, never married again, but forever known to her inner circle as a woman who chose youth not for thrill, but for peace. As the golden glow of Hollywood fades into legend, these timeless women remind us that passion knows no age. Their daring romances, defiant choices, and lasting allure continue to captivate us, proving that love, in all its forms, remains the ultimate rebellious act. Thank you for watching.